Well, hello. We're going to have our first little discussion of the history of American foreign relations. I guess to understand us and how we see the world, we have to go back to before we even became a United States. Let me take you back to about 1630. There was great turmoil in England, soon to be a civil war, and a group of religious folks got out of London by the skin of their teeth and came to America. We refer to them as Puritans. Their leader was a man named John Winthrop, and the boat that he was on with these emigrants was a boat called the Arabella. And Winthrop, being a very religious individual, took a passage out of the Gospel of St. Matthew. And he said that he could see that this new colony that he was taking his followers to get out of England, was a shining city on a hill. Meaning it would be an example, a light to the world. I think if anything explains how the United States has seen itself, it is that way. We have, from that time forward, seen ourselves as a repudiation of the old world values, the old world political machinations, that somehow we were a little morally superior to them. I think that's a fair way to see us. And in understanding our dealings with the rest of the world, it's probably really fundamental to understanding that vignette from our founding, that we would be a shining city on a hill. Needless to say, of course, we were originally colonies of England's. We began to see the importance of international relations as we declared independence from England in 1776. We were a very small, ragtag bunch of people. We didn't have much of an army. We didn't have much of a navy. We really didn't even have a way of funding the war. We printed a lot of monopoly money in order to fund the war, which caused a bunch of problems after the war. But we knew we couldn't win the war without some help. And so we began with maybe the most famous American of the 18th century, a guy named Benjamin Franklin. Franklin went to France, reasoning that the enemy of my friend, he figured that the one country that would probably love to knock England down a few pegs and by the process help us was France. Franklin went to Paris and began a very intense lobbying campaign to get the French to join our side. The French took a while to come around. They needed to be convinced that this wasn't just a family squabble, if you will, a civil war, but that it was a real war for independence before they would get involved. In 1778, the Battle of Saratoga, the victorious General Burgoyne convinced France that maybe with a little help that we could maybe be victorious. And it would give England a bloody nose, maybe a black eye or two on the world stage. And then it might also help France feel a sense of honor for its defeat in the French and Indian War barely more than a decade before. It was Franklin's very astute playing of his French audience, and actually really understanding that the French maybe would help if only they could see some victories, that enabled the French to join our side in 1778, and then by 1780, Several of the non-aligned countries in Europe also began to boycott English goods, began to not allow English ships passage in their ports as kind of punishment for this war, the American Revolution. And finally, in, of course, 1781, the Battle of Yorktown, and the Americans, against all odds, but with a lot of help from the French, won the war. Well, we won, now what? And we began to work on what type of government we wanted. And so, like any new experiment, the pendulum swung wildly to the other side. And we created this thing called the Articles of Confederation, which was really a league of friendship between us and, or within us as a country, and the 13 colonies, or now states, of the United States. The Articles of Confederation were called a League of Friendship. Well, that tells you right off the bat that this was a fairly weak idea, and it was. But it was a pendulum swing. We had to find the proper equilibrium. We knew what we didn't want. We didn't want a monarchy. We didn't want an all-powerful central government. But in creating something less than that, we almost doomed the government of the United States to failure before it even got going, because it didn't have the power to tax. It didn't have the power to raise an army. It really, in many ways, didn't even have real power to conduct foreign policy. And so in the first few years after the American Revolution ended, the United States was very close to falling apart. And it was finally about 1786 that a group of concerned citizens called for a convention at Annapolis. One of them was a guy named Alexander Hamilton. One of them was a guy named James Madison. And the conference at Annapolis was a real failure. It was a nothing burger, as they say. Really, only 5 colonies sent people. That even underscored the weakness of the Articles of Confederation. But the one thing that came of this was an idea that we would have a convention and create something to remedy the flaws within the Articles. The something we now know as the American Constitution. Constitutional Convention was held from May of 1787 through the middle of September 1787. And, you know, when we get back together again, we'll talk about the Constitution, particularly as it relates to the foundation of a federal government and how to conduct foreign policy. We'll also talk about how that foreign policy, when I see you again, began to be implemented by George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison. But that's later. We're going to spend some time with the Constitution when you and I talk again. Have a great day. I hope this is fun. I'm having fun just talking to my phone, and I hope I'm talking to you too. Have a great day. Bye.